Welcome to a 300-year journey through time in the history of Matawan, New Jersey. This show was created by the Matawan Historical Society for the 1986 tricentennial celebration of the town. We hope you enjoy this trip through time, for Matawan is a real, live town. Matawan had its official beginnings in 1686, when Thomas and Stephen Warren received a grant of 400 acres from the proprietors of East New Jersey. However, before the white man came to Matawan, the area was inhabited by Indians and monsters. Some archaeologists believe that part of Monmouth County was the estuary of an ancient sea. Support of this came in the late 1800s, when Dr. Samuel Lockwood discovered in the clay banks of Cliffwood the remains of a huge marine lizard called a Mosasaurus. Other fossils, such as shark's teeth, can also be found in neighboring towns. The first human inhabitants of the area were Native Americans, whose impact remains today in such names as Minisink, Chingarora, Matawan, and Raritan. The word Matawan itself has been translated variously as meaning good fur or pelt, or, which is more likely, where two rivers meet. On the Vandervank map of 1656, the Indians of the area were recorded as Matavankans. Matawan lies at the junction of two major Indian trails. It was here that the trail of the Chingaroras of the shore area crossed that of the Minisinks from the Kittatinny Mountains. The Minisinks were the first summer inhabitants of the area, attracted by game, fishing, shells for wampum, and bartering with other tribes. When the Indians came to the shores of the Matawan creeks, they might have seen a view similar to this one. The actual date of the settlement of Matawan is not known. Scotch Presbyterians settled in the area in the late 1680s and called this settlement New Aberdeen. A 1701 survey called the area Mount Pleasant. More and more people came, and Matawan, then known as Middletown Point, became a major shipping port. This monument marks the gravesite of Philip Morin Freneau. It stands just off Route 79, near where his homestead and estate of 1,000 acres once was located. Freneau was a shipping magnate and friend of Thomas Jefferson. He was editor of the National Gazette at Philadelphia and published the New Jersey Chronicle at his home here in 1795. He is, however, better remembered as being the poet of the Revolution. His poems and articles supported the Americans' fight against the British, but none was spared his pen when disagreements were concerned, not even George Washington. Freneau died in 1832. Freneau wasn't Matawan's only contribution to the Revolutionary War. The Burroughs Mansion, pictured here, was built by John Bowen in 1723 at what later became 94 Main Street. The building was purchased in 1769 by Corn King John Burroughs Sr. and was the site of a skirmish during the Revolutionary War. On May 27, 1778, a company of Tory soldiers known as Skinner's Greens attempted to capture Major John Burroughs, the son of the elder Corn King. Major Burroughs incurred the wrath of the British by recruiting and training a company of militia in the gardens of their home. Due to advance warning, the major escaped, but his wife was wounded. She never completely recovered from her injury, and it is said that this was the eventual cause of her death. The Tory troops fired musket rounds into the upstairs plaster. The musket balls have since disappeared, but the shattered plaster still remains. The Burroughs Mansion was not the only site of a military action in town. Near the site of Mount Pleasant Cemetery on New Brunswick Avenue stood the Mount Pleasant Presbyterian Church. The church and its greens were used regularly for patriotic meetings, which had the full support of the church's militant pastor, the Reverend Dr. Charles McKnight. In 1777, the British burned the church down. Reverend McKnight was captured and taken to jail in New York City. He died January 1st, 1778, and was buried in the old Trinity Churchyard in New York City. Not content to fight on home ground, the patriots of the area operated whaleboats out of the Matawan Creek and the Raritan Bay. The sailors on these boats raided Long Island, took prisoners for exchange, and set ships afire in the harbor. The war ended, the area grew and developed. More people came. An 1834 survey described the area as a thriving business place. A steamer plies between it and New York. It contains a bank, 11 stores, 25 mechanic shops, and about 70 dwellings, many of them large and commodious. Horse carts gave way to early automobiles and a trolley on Main Street, to be supplanted by buses and modern cars. In 1882, due to frequent postal confusion with Middletown Point changed its name to Matawan, based on an early Dutch interpretation of an Indian name. This building once served as the post office. Today, the building is a lawyer's office. A new post office was built on Main Street in the downtown section in 1938 and is still in use today. The borough seceded from the township in 1885. The outlying area of Fresno joined the borough in 1933. Matawan had many imposing old homes on Main Street. Part of it was referred to as Captain's Row because of all the sea captains who retired there. This next series of slides will show some of Matawan's older homes. The borough's mansion, one of the oldest houses still standing in Matawan, is a typical Georgian half-house. The foundation stones in the south portion were brought from Europe as ship's ballast. The north portion used New Jersey sandstone in its foundation. The wing was originally a separate house. The old house has a long and varied history. In 1851, the building was known as the Steamboat Hotel. A dentist, Dr. Aaron Pittman, purchased the home in 1854. His family lost it in 1897 by sheriff's sale. The house was purchased in 1904 by Benjamin Franklin Strong Brown, who was owner and publisher of the Matawan Journal newspaper. He promptly added the wraparound porch. From 1935 to 1938, the house was known as the Colonial Tea Room under the proprietorship of Mrs. Thora Thompson. Luncheons were 35 to 50 cents. The building remained in the Brown family until the borough of Matawan purchased it in 1974 for Mr. and Mrs. Ralph Herrick. In 1972, the building was listed in the National Register of Historic Places. Restoration was started in 1976. The borough's mansion is now a museum open to the public and is the headquarters of the Matawan Historical Society. Among the stories attached to the building is that it was a stop on the Underground Railroad during the Civil War. The red brick house at 177 Main Street is another Matawan landmark. Reports vary, but the spacious 22-room house was probably built between 1830 and 1838. It was once called Potter's Folly because the amount of money used for elaborate carving and excellent workmanship was considered excessive at the time. A secret compartment was found between the third floor and the attic. From 1844 to 1856, the house was used to board students for the Middletown Point Academy. It was purchased in 1857 by Dr. Alfred B. Dayton. Mrs. James E. Voorhees, a direct descendant of Thomas Warren, purchased the house in 1907 and remained in the family until the early 1980s. Research has yielded very little on this home on the corner of Main and Church Streets, except that it was one of the most photographed homes in town. This postcard has an interesting feature in that it was touched up. The flagpole was added and the electric pole removed. Cherry Hall at 211 Main Street is another old brick home. It was built in 1838 by Garrett P. Conover. The bricks were made from clay taken from what is now Terhune Park. It was later purchased by Warren B. Hutchinson. This beautiful Victorian at 226 Main Street was built in 1873 for D.C. Ryer, a New York fabric merchant. The walls were covered with expensive silk instead of wallpaper. The double doors of the entrance contained Tiffany glass, one of the many special touches of the home. This postcard shows the birthplace of Joseph D. Beadle, one of Matawan's favorite sons. Beadle was born in 1831 and died in 1894. His birthplace, once known as the old Woodhull House, has long since been razed. Beadle also lived at 267 Main Street. On his way to becoming governor for the state of New Jersey in 1875, Beadle was also a Supreme Court justice. His term as governor was noteworthy for his handling of a nationwide railway strike in 1877, symbolized by rioting and extensive property damage. Through his use of the National Guard, New Jersey was able to avoid the extensive property damage which occurred elsewhere. The building at 267 Main Street and the neighboring ones are being renovated as Matawan Village, a shopping complex. These were just a few of Matawan's homes. Many others which were not singled out may be seen in one of the street scenes, such as this one of Broad Street, or this one of Little Street. The various homes in the town reveal just one aspect of life in Matawan, but of course religion, education, and recreation were other important ingredients. The old churches of Matawan were built along Main Street, and two of the buildings still stand today. The Trinity Episcopal Church, 74 Main Street, shown here in this early 1900s postcard, was built in 1850. Colonel Don Travers was one of the major leaders in this effort. Through the years, the building remained the same, but the area around it has changed. The building is now Bartholomew's, an Italian-American restaurant. The congregation now meets in this building on Ryers Lane. At 147 Main Street, in the heart of the downtown district, the congregation built the Methodist Episcopal Church in 1854. The congregation itself was much older, having been in the circuit since 1786. The church building underwent many changes over the years. In 1889, a bell was installed in the steeple as a monument to Mrs. Kitty J. Brown. An organ alcove was added in 1893. The tower clock was added in 1909 and for a few years struck the hours. This was stopped in 1917 because of complaints from some of the neighbors. The name of the congregation changed to First Methodist Church in 1939 and to First United Methodist in 1968. The old church on Main Street was torn down in 1970 because the structural integrity of the building was failing. The congregation now meets on the corner of Atlantic Avenue and Church Street. The bell on the front lawn is the one from the bell tower of the Main Street Church. When it was on Main Street, the bell was used as a fire alarm. As an organization, there have been references to the Presbyterian congregation as far back as 1761. After their church under Brunswick Avenue burned down in 1778, the Presbyterian congregation rebuilt it at the same location. Years passed and the decision was made to build on Main Street. The property of what was to become 216 Main Street was purchased for $650. The cornerstone was laid in 1841 and the building dedicated in January of 1847. The original section cost approximately $3,000. Lecture and Sunday school rooms were added in 1877, and a tower designed by the noted architect Stamford White was added in 1892. As a December day in 1941 was called a day which will live in infamy by the country, a December day a few years later will remain in the hearts of many Matawan residents for another reason. On December 25th, Christmas night, 1955, the Presbyterian Church burned, victim of a deranged arsonist. The congregation rallied, and these new facilities were built on Route 34 overlooking Lake Lefferts and serve the congregation today. The First Baptist Church is at 232 Main Street. The lot was purchased for $200 in 1834 from I.F. Beadle. The original church was built in 1850, but was destroyed by fire a few short years later. The current building, pictured here, was dedicated in 1860 at a cost of $3,300. During the pastorage of the Reverend F.A. Slater, 1866 to 1889, the lecture room was added. Prior to the church being built, baptisms were held in Gravelly Creek all seasons of the year. In 1970, a steeple was added to grace the building, and here the congregation still worships. In 1981, a modular building was hoisted to its foundation behind this building by a 140-ton crane. This building, which once served as the Presbyterian manse and later the Baptist Education Building, was torn down for a parking lot. As far back as the 1800s, education has been an important activity in Matawan. Down what looks like a driveway between two houses, but is actually Church Street, was located one of Matawan's early educational institutions. The Middletown Point Academy was started in 1834. One of the first buildings was a two-story structure on the corner of Church and Jackson Streets. The building was originally at 13 Church Street, but was later moved down to 1 and 3 Church Street. This building cost $1,020. The school was co-educational. It is said that at one time the principal attempted to keep the boys and girls from exchanging stray glances by hanging a curtain between the two sections. It is also said that the curtain was torn in more than one place. In this view of Church Street, it looks like a quiet country lane. It was here at 10 Church Street that the Middletown Point Academy was built. In 1857, the name was changed to the Collegiate Institute of New Jersey. In 1859, Garrett A. Hobart was a student here. Hobart became a lawyer, state assemblyman, and speaker. He was vice president under William McKinley. In 1874, the building was enlarged and the name again changed. Early in the 20th century, the building was used by the Middletown Military Academy under Colonel C.J. Wright. The academy closed around 1915. The building still stands and is now comprised of cooperatively owned apartments. Matawan also had a public education system. The Matawan Grade School on Broad Street was built in 1895 at a cost of $16,000 and had 8 rooms. The Chickering piano used at the grammar school for many years was obtained under unusual circumstances. The New York Press had a most popular school in New Jersey contest. The school district which clipped the most coupons from the paper won the piano. Committees were formed, parties and other events were held. One account tells of papers being brought in almost by the carload. The piano was won with 141,000 votes. An additional 4 rooms were added in 1908 at a cost of $20,000. The high school classes were originally held in the grade school. The high school program was 1 year long. The Matawan Memorial School was built in 1960 on the site of the original grammar school. The old school was torn down in 1968 for an addition to the memorial school. The high school on Broad Street was built next to the grade school in 1924 at a cost of $175,000. An addition was added in 1940. The school was used until 1962. A new regional high school was built in 1962 on Atlantic Avenue and is still in use. This quaint little building at 165 Main Street on the corner of Main Street and Park Avenue was built around 1830 by Garrett P. Conover. It served from 1921 to 1966 as the public library. When the building was purchased in 1921, it cost $4,850. The new library opened at the same location in 1967. The J. Mabel Brown Children's Annex was completed in 1970. Another addition was added in 1985. Being a center of commerce in the 1900s, Matawan had several hotels. The Aberdeen Inn was located on the corner of Main Street and what is now Station Plaza. This shot shows the interior of the Aberdeen Inn. There was a smaller hotel across the tracks called the Woodbine, which was run by William Kennedy. Across from Memorial Park on Main Street was the old homestead where an auto showroom now stands. The Matawan House was located in the downtown area, and the Farry family was one of the proprietors. These hotels were not the only such establishments in Matawan. Matawan had inns dating back to the Revolutionary War. The Matawan House was torn down in the 1930s, and the central building was built on the site. Water has always been important in the development and existence of Matawan. Long before the movie Jaws, a piece of Matawan history involved a shark encounter. On a hot July day in 1916, Lester Stillwell, 12 years old, quit work to visit one of the local swimming holes in Matawan Creek. As fate would have it, a shark had found its way from the Raritan Bay into the creek and killed young Stillwell. Watson Stanley Fisher, owner of the dry cleaners in downtown Matawan and shown in this slide, raced with others to the scene. Diving into the creek, Stanley Fisher was able to wrest the young Stillwell's body from the shark. However, he also was bitten. He was taken by train to Monmouth Memorial Hospital, now Monmouth Medical Center, in Long Branch, where he died. Matawan is flanked on the north and south by 2 lakes. Both lakes were built by citizens selling subscriptions. As far back as 1890, damming one of the creeks was discussed. It became reality in 1923 when Gravelly Creek was dammed at Main Street to form Lake Matawan. However, pollution and silting has removed much of the lake's beauty today. An iron bridge was built over the lake at Little Street. Here is the view today. Matawan Creek was dammed at Ravine Drive in 1929. The lake formed by it was named after Jacob R.V. Lefferts, who led the campaign to form it. A recreation area and dock were later built in the lake. The lake is still a recreational site with many uses, including a viewing area for the annual fireworks display. Eating by the lake at Buttonwood Manor has become a popular pastime for many years. In the 1920s and 30s, the people of Matawan had another area in which to escape the summer heat. Cliffwood had a boardwalk, saltwater pool, miniature golf course, and 2 large concession buildings. Pollution of the bay helped the Cliffwoods decline in popularity. A hurricane in 1950 destroyed most of the boardwalk. Memorial Park was established in 1927 at a cost of $9,500. It was built as a memorial to war veterans. Additional features have been added, and the park also has a memorial in honor of the fire department. This postcard shows what are now the offices of the Matawan Medical Associates. It was the home of Judge Henry S. Terhune, who donated the land for Terhune Park. Terhune Park was formed between Main, Broad, and South Streets in 1930. Children of all ages now enjoy the park. Clay from this area was used to make bricks for 2 of Matawan's homes in the 1830s. One of Matawan's early movie theaters consisted of wooden benches in the open air. This slide shows a more modern one. The theater is gone now, but the marquee can still be seen downtown if you look carefully. Washington Engine Company No. 1 was formed in 1866 and met on Little Street. Among its trustees were David H. Wyckoff, William S. Horner, and Charles W. Fountain, and Jesse Sickles. This slide shows the building today. In 1901, an arson fire destroyed a block of buildings. Townspeople left their church services to put out the flames. The suspected arsonist was caught and almost lynched due to the hot feelings of the day. He was taken to freehold for a hearing so he could be protected should his guilt be established. The Hook and Ladder was organized in 1877. In the early days when the fire bell rang, horse teams from Van Brunt Trucking Company on Broad Street and the Arrowsmith Funeral Home were used to pull the 2 companies' fire apparatus. In later years, the trolley replaced the teams. M.E. Haley and the Midway Fire Companies were formed in the early 1900s. Matawan firemen have also reported to neighboring towns when necessary. One of the more notable occasions was October 4th, 1918, when the Gillespie shell plant in Morgan blew up. Windows in Matawan rattled and broke. The First Aid Squad was organized in 1934 and was originally part of the fire department. Their building had been built by Garrett P. Conover and was used as a general store. It was moved from the area of Park Avenue and Main Street to Little Street, where it was purchased in 1945 by the First Aid Squad. The First Aid Squad serves the community today from this building on the site of the old one. Caring extends itself in many ways. When the Cheesequake Volunteer First Aid Squad lost their headquarters and equipment in a fire, the Matawan Squad sold them an old unit for $1 so that their work could continue. One of the things which helped Matawan survive and grow over the years has been her industries. The clay deposits of Matawan and its environs provided the home for several potteries, brick plants, and tile factories over the years. Middletown Point Pottery was founded by the firm of Van Scoik and Dunn in 1852 on Washington Street. These crocks, owned by the Matawan Historical Society, are on display at the Burroughs Mansion. In 1880, the firm of Dunlop and Lisk was incorporated, and they purchased the business. The firm is still in business today as a retailer. J.L. Rue Pottery was a South Amboy firm started around 1860. In the 1880s, they had a plant in Matawan on Main Street. The Rue Pottery Company was noted for Majolica pottery. In 1902, the plant was purchased by Matawan Tile, which went out of business in the early 1940s. Matawan Tile products were used in the Boston subway system, as well as the swimming pools of ships of the Dollar Line. This slide shows one of Matawan Tile buildings today. The Atlantic Tile Company was established in 1910 by Charles Barker. Its products were used in the 8th Avenue IND subway in New York City. The firm was sold to the Mosaic Tile Company in 1919. Matawan was also known as a banking town for many years. The Farmers and Merchants Bank was chartered in 1830 and for 34 years was the only bank in Monmouth County. The building was erected in 1838. This view shows the Farmers and Merchants Bank in its 1914 building. It is currently the Borough Hall. The Stillwell residence and Miss Marjorie Terhune's home became the site of the present-day Franklin State Bank and its parking lot. The Farmers and Merchants Bank merged with the Franklin State Bank in 1971 and is in business in this building today. The Matawan Bank was chartered in 1915. The banking rooms were then in the Oddfellows Hall. It had a starting capital of $50,000. The bank moved to this building in 1921. Christian Heiser was instrumental in starting the bank and for many years served as its president. The Central Jersey Bank and Trust was incorporated in 1932 as a freehold trust company and adopted its current name in 1959. In 1963, the Matawan Bank was purchased by the Central Jersey Bank and became one of its branches. Matawan was a shipping port as far back as colonial times. In 1832, steamboats came up Matawan Creek. An advertisement around 1836 for the steamboat Monmouth advertised a 50-cent fare to New York. Produce from area farms was shipped to market by boat. Some of the ships which served the town were the Monmouth, William S. Horner, master, the Hope, Captain Green, master, and the Rockland, Banner, and Oregon. The silting in of the creek and the use of larger vessels helped end shipping in Matawan. The Matawan stage line was established in 1837 to carry passengers from the Middletown Point Steam Company over a plank road into town. In 1887, the stage line was sold to William Van Brunt. The main business was switched to freight, and scenes similar to this one were common. Van Brunt Trucking operated for many years in Matawan at 93 Broad Street until Harvey Van Brunt Jr. died and the business was sold. In 1887, the Keyport and Matawan Street Railway had its grand opening. The trolley eventually ran from Keyport through the downtown section of Matawan. and through the commercial block to Fresno. Until service was stopped in 1923, the trolley in Matawan had a stormy history. Switching from horsepower to electric power in 1901 and from open cars to enclosed ones were not the only changes. The trolleys were run under different corporate names, such as the Monmouth Traction Company and the Jersey Central Traction Company. Bankruptcy caused several owner changes over the years. The Jersey Central and Pennsylvania railroads ran through Matawan. The station opened in 1875 and is now considered a historic building. The $12.25 monthly commutation ticket for a 57-minute ride to Pennsylvania Station in New York is different from the ride today. The length of the trip is officially about the same, but the cost is now over $150. A new station was built across the railroad tracks, and the old station was closed. Matawan had many other businesses over the years. The next few slides show a few of them. From 1913 to 1916, the Wasson Piano Company created pianos, one of which is shown here, restored by the Matawan Historical Society. This building, formerly occupied by the American Rice Food and Manufacturing Company, housed the piano factory. The building was destroyed in 1916 by fire. In the 1890s, the Anticel family also manufactured pianos in Matawan. Stores have served the public in downtown Matawan for many years. Members of the Cartan family had sawmills, a coal and feed yard, and a department store. Bell Beef was established in 1916. Note the prices in this view. Food Town in Matawan owes its existence to this early meat market. Though the horse cart has gone the way of the plank or dirt road, as seen in this rural view of Ravine Drive, and commercialism has changed this view of Route 34 near Strathmore, or this one near Buttonwood Manor, more houses now flank Little Street. The models A and T are now cherished as antiques. The future is now. Though part of Matawan's history and heritage has disappeared, much still remains. Private homes have been restored and converted to offices. Stores, offices, or homes, whatever the new use, a bit of heritage has been preserved. The downtown has changed in each decade. But time and progress will always endanger it. While 300 years young in 1986, it is hoped that some of our heritage will remain after the next 300 years have passed, so that Matawan will still be a place to live, work, play, and remember.